Hello, everybody. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum. I'm Professor Jinhua Zhao, City of Transportation at MIT. Today is the 171st session of the MIT Mobility Forum, talking about design's role in shaping mobility. When we encounter a transportation challenge, the first thing is think often, oh, this is an engineering problem, or this is economics problem, or a policy problem. But what about design? Physical design. So for that, I'm really glad to have Dylan Jones, the principal from Gensler, who's also head of the city and mobility sector from Gensler, to share with us his thinking, particularly the user experience focus. I'll invite Dylan to give actually three different set of examples from applying this principle to an airport design, to public transit, and to the recent electric vehicle charging system. Also glad to have Julie Montgomery from Sound Transit joining us today. So first, maybe I'll invite Dylan and Julie to each say a few words about yourself. Dylan, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you. And thank you, Jinhua and MIT, for having us on the call today. I'm a principal with Gensler. I'm an architect by licensure and a planner. I lead Gensler's mobility lab. I practice out of Seattle, Washington, and I lead our transportation practice globally.
Thank you, Dylan. Julie.
Yes, my name is Julie Montgomery. I am with Sound Transit. We are a major public transportation agency in the Seattle, Tacoma, Everett, Washington area. My role there is Director of Architecture and Art. So for the Capital program, I lead a group of architects and public art administrators to build out our system. And of course, we are very keyed into the passenger experience and anything we can learn about how we can do things better for them.
Very nice to have you, Julie, here. Dylan, give us the take-home message. After this 1 hour discussion, what would the audience learn?
So I think what the audience is going to learn is a couple things. One is the effective utilization of transportation systems in our cities is dependent on a number of factors. It's dependent on the ability to deliver the systems in the first place, to align to answer the why of public transit. Also to maintain and operate the systems, which are incredibly complex and take, huge numbers of people dedicated to hard work maintaining the kind of efficacy of the systems. And finally, it takes the delivery of a passenger experience that is attractive to people. So people have many choices in the world. They can't be afraid of a public transportation choice based on experiential drivers. So what people are going to learn is a methodology for understanding how experience impacts people's decision-making around mode choices and how positive experience can lead to better choices or choices that help reduce congestion and improve air quality and safety, et cetera, in our communities.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dylan. Yeah, while Dylan's projecting the slides, before give the full, Dylan, you feel free to do that. Let me make two remarks. The first one, I want to reinforce the norm of this forum. That is, everybody contribute one idea. I'm referring to the audience here, right? Either a comment to Dylan or question. So feel free to type into the chat directly. Secondly, given we're talking about design here, I will encourage everybody in the audience to share with us one example where you think this is such a good design in the transportation system. Just type into the chat in which city, which project you think this is a piece of art I want to share with everybody, right? Please do that along the way as well. Thank you. So the forum is yours, Dylan, please.
And can you see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. So first off, Gensler, just to give you a quick introduction of who we are and how we see the world. Gensler is a 6,000 person design firm practicing in about 50 offices all around the world. We were founded in San Francisco 60 years ago. We practice across about 33 different practice areas, broadly structured under sectors of cities and infrastructure, lifestyle and sports, healthcare, and workplace design. We're an employee-owned firm and have never bought another firm, so we've grown organically due to the basis of our strong culture and our investment in our people. We've always been profitable, and we take those profits and we give them back to our people so that we can attract the best talent. But we also spend a lot of our profits every year funding research. So we run competitive applications every year and fund about 40 or 50 different research efforts that are led by staff in our firms in collaboration with our partners, communities, and clients across all of our fields. And this research has allowed us in the mobility and transportation area to look at user experience, which we see as the common currency of design. We think about improving people's lives through the power of design and really understanding what is the experience people have as they live their lives. So I want to start this story talking about where this research came from. And it came from our work at SFO. We've done a lot of terminal work at SFO. If you've been there recently, the new Terminal 1 that just opened up is something we're very proud of. A picture here is from Terminal 2, which opened in about 2011, 2012. And not long after we opened the terminal, the SFO authority came back to us and they said that this terminal you opened up and we're generating more revenue per passenger than any other terminal in the world. We don't know what you did when you designed this, but we want you to bottle it. So they asked us to create a set of design guidelines so that as they develop their renovations to their other terminals and develop new terminals, they could also capture this revenue that was developed within the terminal. And we came up with this design guide that's called the Principles of Reach, and that stood for Revenue Enhancement and Customer Hospitality. Now, just our approach to work, because we have a strong hospitality practice as well, when we design the airport, we work closely with our hospitality designers. And instead of thinking about what the airport might look like on the cover of our architectural magazine, we thought about how people would feel as they actually moved through the airport. What was their experience, and how could we develop a picture of that? And what we had done when we designed this is we broke down the passenger experience based on the kind of broad issues people were facing, departing passengers, arriving passengers, connecting passengers, understanding who they were and what typologies they were. There were leisure passengers looking to take a trip to Disneyland. There are assisted passengers who needed help navigating the airport, business travelers who travel all the time, families, unique kind of passengers. And we looked at SFO's values around different spatial issues, convenience, wayfinding, time and efficiency, et cetera. And then we broke down these passengers' journey moments into a series of discrete places, the approach, the ticketing, the checkpoints, recompose, and met with user groups to understand how did they feel when they were coming out of security and their bags were on the table and their kids were screaming and they might be late. Like, how did they feel? Were they stressed? Were they relaxed? Were they anxious? And then what design interventions could we make in those specific moments that could alleviate or support them in their emotional journey through the airport? Now, it turns out, though we didn't necessarily set out to do this, it turns out if you take care of people's emotional state, they tend to spend a lot more money in the retail establishments. So that's very good for their business, and we've been helping them continue with that approach. Now, in the ground-based transportation system, the metrics or the drivers are a little bit different, whereas airport authorities tend to be looking to generate more revenue per passengers. Transit agencies don't necessarily make money from either the fare box or from retail within the stations. What they tend to be very interested is in ridership and ridership numbers. The more riders that take transit, the more public support in the local communities and in the political kind of decision makers, and also the more funding can be generated through kind of supportive funding measures. So we were very interested in translating the approach from Reach at SFO into Reach for Transit, and set off to develop an approach that we could apply to transportation, which we did. We did it pre-COVID and then post-COVID, and then also apply that approach to charging in what we called recharge. So starting with Reach for Transit, how did we do this? So the question really is, how is the experience of public transit changing post-COVID? What factors have the greatest impact on that experience, and how can design enhance the passenger experience and support ridership? These are the big questions. So our approach is we identified 3 transit systems to work within: LA Metro, MARTA in Atlanta, and WMATA in Washington, D.C. We set up focus groups, which were demographically representative focus groups based on ridership, survey data. And we looked at 4 passenger typologies. We selected folks who were all around riders who use transit pretty much for everything, whether work or errands, et cetera. Regular riders, which were more kind of what we would say commuters, social riders who rode transit, for the big game or for specific moments, and also senior and disabled riders, some of the most the folks that are really have the greatest challenges to ride transit, but are often transit dependent, i.e. they don't have other choices. And we broke down the journey moments into about 9 different journey moments, getting to transit, buying tickets, tapping through turnstiles, making your way onto platforms, waiting on the train, navigating the system, et cetera. So the systems that we chose, we selected systems among the top 10 in the US in cities with transit mode share less than 50%. So we wanted to kind of avoid outliers for now, like New York City, and focus on, the systems that, automobiles still dominate, but the transit systems are very important and have a little bit more of a tenuous political hold within voters in the cities, but we see as very important. So the riders, as I mentioned, the all-around routine, social, and senior disabled. This isn't all of the rider typologies we could choose from, but in focusing our study with the resources we had, we wanted to select this broad range to get some really great feedback. I mentioned the different journey moments, including exiting stations, getting to the final destination all the way. So these are the different moments that we could drill into and talk to people about specifically. And through all those meetings, those very rigorously structured qualitative research user group meetings where we bring people together, have conversations, ask specific questions, and get people talking, it is an unbelievably fantastic way to get deep insights into how people are actually experience the system. What we found always is safety. Safety is so important. It's top of mind consideration of passengers when making choices. Concern about safety and security on trains and stations significantly impacts whether passengers will choose transit for a given trip. Just some of the quotes at the bottom, I won't read them all, but waiting on the platform alone is sketchy, especially at night. I don't feel comfortable with waiting at night, when there's no other solo girls my age to make eye contact with. And also health issues, and this is coming out of COVID, mind you, but with elderly parents at home, I don't want to risk catching something on the train. So safety and security is top of mind for riders. And these aren't surprising issues. Keep it clean, but we're hearing this, as really, really important. The cleanliness of stations and trains has significant impact on riders' perception of transit. The issue of homelessness was often referenced. And though, people are very sensitive to the complex issues, they're also very sensitive to kind of the smells and the safety concerns. My worst moment on the downtown platform, it's nasty, smells like nothing but urine. No one kicks people off when they smell. There's this tension between kind of social kind of acceptance and patience with kind of civic decorum that comes to the fore in this like important civic space of our cities. And it's not an easy one. People are sensitive to the issues, but they're also struggling with some of the kind of externalities. Free times matters. This is really interesting. Riders value their time gained by riding transit, which they use for work, entertainment, or relaxation. In our age where we have our iPhones and we can binge watch, with our headphones in, we can binge watch Netflix, we can do some work, etc. The idea that you don't have to pay attention to the road is a big deal. People say Metro is less stressful because I can do other things and I don't have to worry about parking. I actually enjoy the ride because I can read something or listen to podcasts while looking outside. Ease of use and environmental comfort are essential. Things like wayfinding, signage, the ability to navigate the system. A lot of people, when it's a first-time rider and they don't know how to buy a ticket, that can be a huge barrier to using the system at all. Once somebody's comfortable with doing that, they can, they're much more likely to take transit. Things like the audible audible alerts in stations is a big deal. You can't hear announcements, somebody said, at stations. Too quiet or hard to hear or garbled. And announcements on trains are often wrong. Signage isn't well lit and it's different on all the lines. I've got the wrong way before. It sucks, somebody said. People make the difference. This is another one. At its best, transit can inspire civic pride and provide a sense of community. People talk about this. Passengers reported the highest satisfaction when riding with friends or as a group with other sports fans going to the same event. However, the behavior of other passengers, including harassment, can have a significant negative impact on the other side. Somebody said going to a concert at Staples or a USC game when everyone is amped up is super fun. It's a whole other experience. People talked about this as part of the joy of going to a sporting event was the actual, celebration on the train. I always see confused tourists. Most people stop to help. If people didn't help, they'd never figure it out. The way people behave with each other on a crowded train is very different than how people behave with each other on a crowded freeway. And the kind of social cohesion that's developed when people help each other, when people see this, can be very powerful as a kind of a civic, a positive civic force. So in conclusion, as potential transit riders have more mobility choices than ever, including virtual mobility, where you don't even have to go anywhere, you can just use Zoom, experience matters more. For transit agencies seeking to improve rider experience and increase ridership, focusing on safety and security, ease of use, and community pride is the best place to start. A great transit experience allows riders to focus on what matters to them, working, relaxing, or connecting with friends and family. So we took all of this research and have been working with LA Metro on upgrading their underground stations to enhance this rider experience while paying attention to issues of operations, and maintenance, et cetera. So here's a picture of 7th and Metro Station in downtown LA. This was taken early in the morning, but I can tell you this is the busiest station in the system outside of Union Station. And, it's dark and it's old, it's, tile, it's visually, cluttered, where there should be somebody kind of looking out for people. There's nobody. It's just not a great experience. So we've been working with LA Metro to develop system-wide design standards that brighten the stations, that reduce visual clutter, that install fare gates that are transparent, but also provide a threshold and an additional layer of safety for once you're inside the system. More eyes on the street, so to speak. Standardized help points and trash cans, and more airport-like finishes and easily to clean, bright steel finishes. So all of these design moves work to improve experience of safety, feelings of security, cleanliness, and it raises the kind of threshold of social decorum within these spaces. Okay, switching gears to EV charging. So again, it's a different mode, but at Gensler, we believe in multimodal systems within cities, so people have choice, which builds resiliency. And we wanted to look at the EV charging experience because it's often been noted that enhancing the charging experience is key to realizing the potential of electric vehicles for everyone. So this line of research we called Recharge. So it's still the ridership enhancement and customer hospitality or revenue enhancement. So this one is Recharge, revenue enhancement, customer hospitality for charging infrastructure. So the questions included, what is the experience of EV charging today? How can design interventions and complementary program elements enhance that experience? And how can better charging infrastructure support a range of sustainable transportation options as part of a regional transportation planning, mobility hub design, and mixed-use development? So we've also done, separate to this, global research where we've taken surveys amongst 30 or 40 different cities all around the world and asked these kind of broad questions. And we've learned that globally over 50% of urban residents remain unwilling or unable to switch to a hybrid or electric vehicle to reduce their environmental impact. And oftentimes the reason for that is because of the challenge of charging. People just don't see, they either don't have charging infrastructure at home, don't know how they would charge in the wild, or concerned about this kind of issue of range anxiety. So the research process here remains the same. There's background research. We look at previous studies, market trend data, and then we do the primary research, which includes interviews with industry experts and charging providers. And then most importantly, user profile definition and focus group meetings with EV users in target markets. So in this case, we wanted to focus on 4 target markets, London, Los Angeles, Mexico City, and Toronto. Because of, to focus our resources, we end up focusing on Los Angeles and Toronto on this first round. We thought that those would be good because the climatic differences were very different, and there's some, differences culturally with the different countries. And then we develop, after the focus groups, we have the meetings, and we create findings and opportunities summary and issue our findings. And we take those findings forward as we work with different EV charging and OEMs as they develop charging solutions in communities. So here are the target markets. Again, I think it's really important to expand this, especially Mexico City in LATAM, where there's rapid adoption of EVs, as well as in some of the European and Asian markets, but that's for a later date. The experience moments, again, it's journey moments. You're planning, like, where do I charge? If you're driving around and you need to plan for that charging experience, how do you find the chargers? Parking, like actually parking within the, accessing the site, parking your car, connecting the cables, charging, which can take, 20, 30, 40 minutes or more. What are you doing during that time? And then driving away. The user profiles in Los Angeles and Toronto we focused on were the electric commuters, folks that use their cars every day. The urban chargers, perhaps they, there might be a stay-at-home mom or dad, or they use their car more just in urban trips. EV road trippers, we wanted to look at folks taking road trips in their EVs. And then finally, gig workers, which were a fabulously rich group of people to talk to, people that had bought EVs, but were using them to drive Uber, Lyft, etc. So interestingly enough, the takeaways in Toronto and LA, there was similarities around ease of use, convenience, and incentives. But when you drilled into the conversations, there were slight differences in what the issues were. And it had to do with the kind of form of development in the two cities, whereas Toronto is more, it's denser and more centralized as an urban conglomeration, whereas LA is a more sprawling city. So ease of use, Toronto, the EV charging landscape is highly fragmented, causing frustration when interfacing with charging stations. So a lot of people complained about third-party apps, not all kind of syncing together, et cetera. So just the finding the station was challenging. And the payment method was inconsistent, which was further frustrating users. Convenience, the location of a charging station heavily influenced the behaviors of EV users. EV drivers were drawn to frequent businesses and destinations that had EV charging stations. A lot of people talked about certain grocery stores that, that they would frequent just because they knew it had good EV charging. And EV charging stations located in close proximity to main thoroughfares were highly sought after to economize on time. Incentives, EV drivers are highly sensitive to different prices and amenities along charging stations. Charging stations that offered lower pricing or even free charging because of retail offerings were heavily influenced the selection of decisions. And drivers were highly responsive to amenities such as Wi-Fi, security camera coverage, trash bins, and free air. In Los Angeles, all interviewed avoided charging away from home at all costs due to numerous inconveniences. Equipment is often faulty or broken. Envisioned as a great charging experience, people with simple desires, so we asked them, what would you want here? And their answer, we might have thought, oh, we want a coffee, a coffee bar or a lounge. They would say things like trash cans and window cleaning would be amazing. So it's like the simple things that people were missing. People generally sit in their cars and engage internet content while charging. Safety and security is a real issue. No attendance, poor lighting, lack of adjacent activity, back of lot, industrial locations, and charge times were all cited as attributes of an environment that did not support a feeling of safety and security, especially after dark. Frequented places like grocery stores offered a few charging stations. They are universally oversubscribed and practically unavailable. Furthermore, locations of EV charging stalls and prime locations and lots led to EV owners parking here even when not charging, or non-EV cars. So like the EV stalls were often put right at the front of the store by the handicap stalls. So people would take those spots just because they were the best spots. And the people who actually needed to charge their EVs, were barred. And then finally, infrequency of use was a deterrent to subscription-based public charging. People charge at home in every chance they can get. So they don't necessarily use charging in the wild all the time. They are saying they're willing to pay a nominal subscription fee to access a network that included basic amenities and reliable equipment. And range anxiety is a real thing for everyone, believing the actual range of vehicles in practice is nowhere near the perfect conditions range published by automakers. So the design takeaways, where can design have the biggest impact? Location of proximity to existing amenities is big. Get the basics right, something to do, safety, lighting, cleanliness, attendance, location. These are all really important in improving this experience. Wayfinding, availability of information about the neighborhood, standardized equipment, seamless direct payments, and balanced supply of chargers with EVs on the road. So these are all specific issues that we can start to address as we develop sites in the city. And that's a run through of the 3 different modes and how we approach diving into experience within those modes, which all leads to incredible design work that actually drives positive change for our clients, whether it be airport authorities or public transit agencies or EV charging clients. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dylan. It's really nice. So before I invite Julie, I'll just say one thing. Most transportation professionals, when we look at travel behavior, we'll ask where do you go, what time, what cost. But Dylan, you asked, how do people feel? That's a very distinct way of thinking there, right? Really appreciate this. In fact, at MIT, I teach a class called Behavior Science and Urban Mobility. One section is on emotional travel. So I should invite you as a guest lecturer to the class and share the experience on this, right? Yeah. So I have a couple questions, but before I do, let me add Julie here to offer a few remarks from Sound Transit perspective. Yes, Julie.
Sure, thank you. Well, I just have to say that this kind of research helps us incredibly. It helps confirm where we're headed, but it also helps point out some areas that we can further improve. So, like on Dylan's research around the ridership issues and what really brings people into public transportation, we're seeing a lot of parallels in defining the passengers. It's very similar to how we define the passengers. And I will say that we put an extra focus on passengers with different abilities so that if we are supporting their journey, we're supporting everybody else's journey as well. Also, we've seen a lot of similarities in those key factors he pointed out. So safety is just number one. Like if people don't feel safe, they're really far less likely to ride transportation, and that's for riders of all types. And then the cleanliness is also right up there as a very important item. And we do see that people appreciate their free time, getting out of traffic. I love that several of our lines go right along freeways, and so you get a real stark representation there. On the EV charging, as an agency, we are kind of in the middle of trying to sort out a whole bunch of different things related to that. Of course, there are the aspirations for having electric vehicle charging so that we can be more sustainable. But then there's the actual demand. How many people actually need it? And then another item is the local jurisdictions. As we build parking garages and parking facilities, the local jurisdictions have requirements for how many EV chargers we've got to provide. And then an additional thing that we're juggling is the actual devices, and that because we're federally funded, we need to work with American-made devices. And so that's a bit of a challenge on some of our projects right now. And the research that Dylan presented can really, it really helps us to see what other agencies are doing, what they're struggling with. It may or may not be exactly the same issues we've got, but it really helps us to define them. So I want to thank Dylan and Gensler for doing this research and presenting it here today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Dylan, you covered three different domains here, right? Let's start from the charging part, right? I think 3 or 4 years ago, John Boone and the Mobility Initiative, we actually did a study on the charging. We find that for all of the non-Tesla charger, 25% of it doesn't work, right? I mean, imagine you could go to pump your gas, 25% gas station where you cannot pump gas. It would be not acceptable, right? But somehow on charging, that's the reality there. On that, I would to ask you about how do you think we can really change that situation, but also particular angle on the dense urban areas you're working in Toronto. I believe in the like apartment, right? In the suburban villa, I can put a charger there, but for apartment, it's very hard to retrofit the building, put a charger there. What do you see as the challenges and any thinking on how to tackle those things?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that charging is complex. The actual physical act of charging is very difficult for a number of people. The cables are very heavy on the fast charging cables. The ports on the cars, some are on the left, some are on the right, some are on the front, some are on the back. So you hear about people, struggling with these cables. Sometimes you have to be like an NFL linebacker to pick these cables up and carry them to the other side of your car. And that's like a really specific kind of human to car operational moment that can be really challenging. I mean, from an infrastructure perspective, as the chargers and people want faster and faster chargers, somebody mentioned the BYD 5-minute chargers, those require 1.4 megawatts of electricity to operate. So, that's a lot of power. I mean, if you want to fast charge 10 cars or 100 cars at once, you're drawing enough power for, a chunk of the city. So we're starting to talk more and more on that side of the equation, where we've talked about transit-oriented development in the past. We're starting to talk about electric-oriented development, where we combine electric infrastructure with mobility infrastructure, with kind of land use planning to create a better infrastructure base for the communities we need to build for in the future. It's really challenging, these moments within pre-existing multifamily housing to develop the kind of charging infrastructure. I think what we need is a new kind of mobility hub concept in our cities that operates better. And we're also seeing the kind of rise of robo-taxis in cities. And I mean, we're designing robo-taxi charging machines where cars pull into these kind of machines and they get kind of automatically charged and get sped back out. So the irony is that the experience of actually charging a car as a human being and have something to do while you're charging or a place to charge, which is very real and present. What we're seeing more and more of is the need to figure out how to charge robots that don't even have people. They have mechanical arms, etc. So there's a lot to do. I'll give you one anecdotal story. We had a developer in Malibu who ran a mall, and the anchor of that mall disappeared. It was like one of these anchors that can no longer be in business, and it was an empty box. And they put in a Tesla fast charger as a temporary measure. The Tesla fast charger drove more retail value and development into the mall than the anchor had been doing for 20 years. Because people who have a lot of money who have Teslas came and they plugged in, and then they spent 30 minutes spending money in the mall. So the kind of programmatic adjacencies for people is yet to be fully realized, I think.
Indeed, on that, actually, just 2 years ago, one of our students, Yun Han Zheng, who's a professor now, did a study on electric chargers' impact on the business that's surrounding, right? There's actually very substantial improvement or the positive impact on the foot traffic and the consumption because of the charger. So the broader point you mentioned about the coupling between the land use system, mobility system, and energy system is much stronger today. This right.
Yeah.
And on that, maybe we can talk about how do we transform the gas station, right? Gas station is a necessity; people have used it, but from the real estate value point of view, it's a sink. Nobody wants to live nearby the gas station. Housing price is lower, and it's a soar in the urban landscape. So if we imagine this become an electric hub, the potential can be a community center, can be a library, can people gather on this, right? So really glad that you're thinking this type of a vision to bring the three together. Yes.
Yeah, we did a great research piece with BMW actually looking at gas stations. There's like 130,000 gas stations in the US, and they're all at the corner of Main Street and Main Street in every community. And if we don't need those in the future, how do they operate as mobility hubs, as community centers, as like EV charging nodes, et cetera? It's a really great question as we think about land uses and because they're great sites, but they might not necessarily be needed in the future if we go fully electric.
Right. Yeah. Michael Wood is one of this year's senior fellow. Actually, did some work on the station as gas station as well. Later, we'll connect you on this. Right?
Yeah.
So let's move to the public transit side. Right. I want to talk about two questions. The first one is safety. Right. You mentioned how design can help improve the perception of safety there. For that, I just want to give you one anecdote and then invite you to give us what are the key factors the station should introduce to improve safety. Last year, John and I visited Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. We arrived at the airport about 8 p.m. or something, and we get on the train and take the train to the city. That system was built like a year ago. And at about that's 9 p.m., the train is very well utilized, and half of the passengers are women. I want to give you the context. Saudi Arabia is a country where until 2018, women are not allowed to drive. In this culture, the public transit system can be developed to a stage where women can feel so free, so safe traveling the public transit system, right? So that really impressed me as the design power in that. So a question for you, Dylan, is in the context that you're working with, where do you see as still major challenges to this issue, and what solution design can bring to really improve that?
Well, I'll have a few comments, and I'd love to hear Julie talk about this as well because she's more on the front lines of this. But it's really challenging. The transit systems let's just talk about America. I mean, they're all over the world, but within America, they're almost the most important civic spaces we have in our cities. It's where broad swaths of the city come together in, dense packs of people from all economic and racial and socioeconomic spectrums, and they come together and get into very tight spaces together, and they're open systems generally. There's a lot of things that need to be managed at almost like a social and political level that are beyond the kind of tools of design per se. But from a design perspective, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot of kind of design. When we think about decluttering environments, opening up visual sight lines, brightening spaces, thinking about the acoustics of spaces, making sure we have kind of eyes on the street, so to speak. Or do you feel alone, or do you feel safer in a crowd? I think that there should be, and this is not an entirely shared idea, but we could start thinking about certain kinds of like a social contract. Like if you ride transit, you shall conduct yourselves, appropriately, and that's a difficult one. It's political. I don't want to tread too far into that, but it's like, I think there's behaviors in transit stations when you see open air drug use or, certain types of vandalism or vagrancy or behaviors that are outside the norms of accepted behavior. It can be very disrupting to people's willingness to engage in those systems. And I think we have to find a way to get around that. But again, back to design, equipment that's standardized, that's easy to maintain and clean across systems is really important. Talking to folks at LA Metro, and they have all these different stations. They have a warehouse with 300 different types of light bulbs. It's a mess, and it's hard to quickly maintain and upgrade or fix or replace things when they're bespoke or unique to a single place. So, where can system-wide design strategies start to improve, just the functioning of those things. I'll give you one last story. The design of these things is really important. The trash cans, LA Metro had like 7 or 9 people out on long-term disability leave because they used to pull the trash bags out of the can, and the trash bags would fall down and stab the cleaning people with hypodermic needles. And we learned that by talking to the people that were in charge of actually taking out the trash. And so we designed trash cans where you could swing the trash open, pull the can out in a canister, and protect the people using it. So making sure the experience isn't just great for riders, but the workers, the huge workforce that maintains and lives in these stations is really important. If they're happy, that projects itself to users in the environment and can really make a big difference.
Wow, I'm so glad that you mentioned the worker side. That MIT is actually working with Chicago Transit Authority on how to really understand and improve the worker welfare there. The example you offer as a design solution is really, really great. And also the broader point about saying many of the problems we see in transit is beyond transit is really a societal issue there, right? You mentioned that the ideal society where public transit can be seen as a way to improve social coherence, and people carry their civic pride when using public transit. That indeed the goal we aim for, right? In the principle of reach, the word hospitality really interesting. The way you should frame this as hospitality service on this, right? Then the other word is also very powerful. That's revenue. Be very explicit. This is a double bottom line here, right? It benefited the customer, also benefited the owner or the operator here, right? So on that, maybe I would like you to comment on the general sense, how do you improve the double bottom line? But also a specific point. You mentioned that there's a contrast between airport and transit in the United States, right? In airport, you improve the customer experience. People actually spend more in the airport than that, right? In transit, in US transit, we don't. But in much part of the rest of the world, Tokyo, people spend a lot in the transit stations, Hong Kong, Singapore, right? So retail can be introduced into the station, into there. So for that, this specific point, do you see any chance that in the United States public transit system, we can introduce those activities that be kind of synergistic to the transit service?
Yes, and I think again, I'd love to hear Julie's thoughts on this one too, because value capture at transit stations is a big topic within transit agencies we work with, and this gets into kind of joint development programs and things like that. I mean, the Hong Kong MTR is amazing. I mean, it's runs at a profit, and it services most of the transit needs of the whole city. And their use of the octopus card that's used as currency within station districts. And it's incredible what they've done there to monetize and generate revenues for the system, which has in turn created some of the cleanest, most efficient system in the world. It's great. And originally in the US, that's how it started. I mean, the LA streetcar system once upon a time had more miles of track than the current New York City transit system. And it was a property development play. It was a private system of streetcars that allowed the development of stationary. So I think what's happened over time is the transit agencies have been given the remit to like operate and maintain or deliver the system, and have because of their charters have been kind of hemmed in their ability to capture value around the stations. But I do think that's changing a little bit, and I think can really help change the way we align transportation and land use. And again, Julie, I don't know if you want to speak to that, because I know you guys are looking at that as well.
Yeah, right. And I see the issue around opportunities for people to purchase things and have nearby businesses. I put them in 2 different categories. There's the nearby transit-oriented development. Those are buildings that are maybe next to the transit-owned spaces. And then there's the transit-owned spaces and maybe retail in the station itself. And we are examining how we can do that better. So we have a few instances where in our relatively new system, so the Link Light Rail system only started operating in the early 2000s. And we have a few places in our system that we have retail that is either part of the station or really kind of connected to it. And some of those have done well, others haven't, but we're really looking at how can we do that better in the future. And one thing we've really learned from folks everywhere is that ridership is a huge driver of retail success near a station. So when you talk about Tokyo and how many people are going through any one of those stations at any given time, that is on an entirely different level than what we experience in the Seattle area. We hope to get there someday if it's needed, but we just know that retail will be successful when there's a lot of foot traffic going by to support that retail. And that's even for a simple coffee cart. So we've tried having some coffee carts at our stations with varied success. We want to figure out how we can do that better.
Great, thank you. Last question from me before I give it to John for the audience question. It's more of a Gensler as an institution here, right? Didn't the Gensler started with this research institute? I'm not sure most companies will have designated resource to do research, right? Within Gensler, how do you justify we should have a group of people doing research, right? So question number one. A sister question is, when you go out working with the client, different cities, agencies, how much convincing you need to do to let people appreciate the power of design? Do you think the people get it? Just, oh, Gensler company help us, or you have to really do a persuasion for people to appreciate this type of thinking here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I wish we didn't have to persuade anybody. It would make my job a lot easier. But I think like on the question about research, like why do we do research? What's the value? There's a couple reasons. One is, we're really focused on helping people that work here connect with their passions. A lot of people, they're hired and they get put on a job and they have to draw something, but they might be passionate about something else entirely. And if we can help align them with those passions and give them a forum through a research platform to ask the question of how does design thinking connect with this passion I have over here? It's a great way to keep people excited about their jobs, help them grow in their jobs, and help them stay and have like a full career here, which is ultimately the goal. The other side of it is we do so much work with clients across so many different businesses, which tend to be in silos. So you don't typically have a conference where aviation leaders are going to the same conference as hotel leaders or sports people or corporate workplace people, but we see all of that. And so it gives us an ability to trend cast. I mean, it's not, there's kind of peeking around the corner because we see what's happening in the industry. We see that, hey, everybody seems to be building data centers long before the rest of the world sees that. What does that mean for our communities? Oh, wow, that's a lot of power going out there. What does that mean? Like, how do we think about that? Can we heat homes with the waste heat coming off of that? Let's talk to our residential leaders. So I think that kind of like seeing the trends happening gives us a little bit of foresight in where the world is going, which is very valuable to our clients. And then if we can layer on resources for research to dive into those questions that come out when we see these trends happening, again, it's more value to our clients. So ultimately, we're a business, we believe in design, its power to improve people's lives, and we're giving our own people the tools to go deeper on those questions so that we can in turn bring back to our clients, because ultimately everything we do is in collaboration with our clients, and then we can in turn make a better world. So for example, with the transit agencies we're working with, we believe transportation is the backbone of a multimodal future. And we want to see our transportation systems successful. I'll give you a quick example, and then I know, John, you've got questions. If you think of an office tower, if you took the elevator out of the office tower, the value of those floors would dramatically decrease. So we see our transit systems like the elevators of our cities, and we have to make those lobbies amazing. We have to make it efficient. We have to make people find their way into it. Otherwise, we might as well pull all the elevators out of all of our towers. Like it makes no sense. So we're all in, and we want to do the research so we can improve the systems.
Thank you, Dylan. Jeff.
So Dylan, Julie, we had a very rich commentary in the chat, and
good.
We will share the chat file with you like we do with all of our guests. Let me start out with a question early on from Sar Golde. So Sar is the chief data scientist at VIA, which is a really interesting company you should look into if, for those of you not familiar with it. But he asked, is studying transit-dependent people or transit users in general the right population to study in order to come up with ways to get people who don't use transit to start using it? So kind of a simple question. I mean, first, maybe that's not what you were doing in the study, Dylan, but how do you address that concept of what to focus on and what types of individuals to survey?
Well, look, it's a fantastic question, and I can partially answer how we did approach that. The short answer is to when you put on the table all the different types of user groups you could look at, um, in a world where we have more resources, we could look at more of them, but we had to cull it down. But we did look in one of the user groups, we looked at people who used to take transit in a city, but no longer do, to find out why that is. So it's a little bit different than somebody who's never used transit or people who are visiting a city and they're trying to, should I rent a car or should I just use transit, et cetera. But it was close to that user group. And we did get some incredible insights from people who opted out of a system that they were familiar with. I think that in terms of like the final choice, it really is a matter of, the research leaders or the people who are looking to answers or insight in specific issues of making those very human and very sometimes flawed decisions about what to focus on and what not, and then working with recruiters to identify those folks. Now, if you have two sorting categories, so like, for example, somebody who used to take transit doesn't anymore, then you can go deeper into the actual survey data of users to be representative of either where people are coming from or the types of users within those user groups.
Excellent. You mentioned that sort of the number one factor in transit systems is safety. Sylvan Hoover asked, should the concern be viewed as safety or sense of safety? There's some nuance here, and I think if we reflect on some of the incident last year in New York City with a person being set
Yeah.
on fire and things like that get a lot of media attention. How do you think about that from your research?
The
And Julie,
sense,
please jump in as
yeah,
well.
and I'll start. I mean, the sense of safety is real. When we did our research across the three transit systems, and I can't remember the specifics of the case, but there was a case where one or two Asian Americans were pushed onto a track in certain cities.
Yeah.
And it made national news. And when we talked to people about their experience and we segmented the types of people that we talked to and surveyed, the Asian Americans ranked waiting on the station as the most challenging moment of their ride. And it was in the wake of that news coming out. So we saw real data on the relationship of that news and people's sense of safety. And it's important. And we don't necessarily talk about the carnage that's happening on our roads every day because we're almost desensitized to it.
Yes.
But if whether it's one person getting, horribly assaulted on a transit system or maybe run over by a robo-taxi, these things are like front page news because they're almost more statistically unusual, I guess. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it's a fantastic question. But I'm not quite sure what the answer is, like how to actually deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, more than 3,000 people will die on the world's roads today. That happened yesterday. That will happen
Yeah.
tomorrow. More than 100 in the United States. And it is fascinating sort of how we as humans process data and our perception of risk and how deeply biased and flawed it can be. I want to get into this concept of experiential mobility, which is kind of at the core. And I mean, I can tell you as a red line user in Boston, there's a moment when that train crosses over the Charles River on, let's say, a beautiful sunny day, and there's sailboats on the river. Even the most, dedicated transit riders embedded in their phone will look up and for a moment and enjoy that moment. So this concept of how do you quantify the value of that? Becky Lynn asked for the LA Metro station, how much would it cost to do that refurb? Do either of you have a sense of, can we quantify the return on investment for putting beautiful art in stations or somehow enhancing that passenger experience?
That's another excellent question. I have this intuitive sense that those special moments, whether it's crossing the bridge, like you say, or even just your eye flitting across a piece of art that you really like and resonate with, I don't think that we have tried to quantify that, but I can tell from anecdotally, it's very important. And it's something that brings people back into the transit system. It helps them have that sense of safety that we were just talking about, that they connect with it. They have that little bit of uplift in their day as they use the transit system. I haven't given much thought about how to quantify that, but I could see that being incredibly helpful because it helps make the case for having more of that or putting it in the right place at the right time. So I don't know, Dylan, have you ever considered how to quantify
Yeah,
that?
yeah. I mean, one of the challenges of these systems takes so long to plan and design and build, and when you're thinking about like, oh, we should quantify this, it's like a 30-year time horizon to get to the other end of the equation. But I think there would be ways of looking at stations that have specific, like art installations, et cetera, and then doing kind of qualitative research where you look at that station versus other kind of benchmark stations. One of the ways we've tried to qualify that is, for example, we were on one of the PDA teams looking at the Sepulveda corridor in LA. And we were on the team that was looking at elevated monorail over the Sepulveda Pass. And there was another team looking at a bored tunnel under the mountains. The elevated system was less popular publicly because nobody really wants to see transit up in the air. They'd rather, out of sight, out of mind, at least the general voters, most of whom don't ride transit. And what we had done is we tried to illustrate what it feels like to ride over the Santa Monica Mountains in an elevated train where you can see the landscape and the ocean and the mountains, and the palm trees and the congested traffic below you as you whisked over top of transit. If you've seen the movie Her, they showed these moments in the movie that like gave you this kind of future view of that. And it's a very different experience than riding inside a tunnel, especially in LA where it's always sunny and beautiful. And, so we tried to qualify the difference in experience. I mean, the systems, if you go above grade, it might be 10 billion. If you go underground, it might be 30 billion. So you could probably quantify what you could do with a $20 billion delta, but it's difficult because most people don't want to see, they don't want to see transit in the air, even though it's a very different experience for the community of riders that are using the system. I think, Julie, you mentioned it earlier about flying over traffic along the freeway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and I'll add too that there are many, many, many other factors that go into making these decisions about tunnel versus at grade
oh
versus
yeah,
elevated, right? I
yeah.
mean the views are a bonus when you get there. They're not a driving factor,
Yeah.
certainly in the economics of where transit agencies and the public decide to put the transportation lines.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. It's a really good point, and I would say that um it's just in an attempt to like really understand the community of users. Like we don't get into that when you look at plan and profile drawings on a transportation, vote per se. It's hard for people to understand what that really means when they're accessing, using, riding the system.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much. I mean, just one last quick comment on experiential mobility. For those of you who have traveled through the Zurich airport and you need to take the underground train from one terminal to the other, there is this sort of wonderful display of, Swiss hidiness. It's a bunch of screens that show an image with alpine horns, and it's just sort of a fun experience that always brings sort of chuckles and joys to people, even the people who pass through that airport
Yeah.
regularly. So hopefully we can have more things like that in transit. Over to you,
Indeed.
Timla.
Indeed. Sorry to cut on at the time now. To conclude, it's a call for action. If all of us can see design as a way of life, you don't need to be a professional as Dylan or Julie here, right? Find one detail of life, use design to improve it. And everybody can contribute to that, right? So everyone, please join me thank Dylan and Julie for today's presentation and conversation. Thank you so much, Dylan.
Thank you.